The sun hung like a molten coin in the sky above Scorching, baking the endless dunes in relentless heat. Dust devils twisted across the landscape, ghostly spirals dancing in the shimmering air. Anthony Sterling adjusted the filtration mask over his face, the worn leather hot against his skin. His shelter, a repurposed mining outpost buried halfway into a dune, stood alone in the wasteland, miles from any settlement or supply route. Anthony hadn't always lived like this. Once, he'd been chief engineer for Terraform Corp, overseeing the atmospheric processors that were supposed to make planets like Scorching habitable. But 3 years ago, a miscalculation in the pressure valves had caused a cascade failure. The resulting explosion had killed 17 workers. The company had quietly shifted blame, and Anthony had walked away from everything: career, reputation, even his own name. Here, in the desert, no one knew who he was or what he'd done. His days followed a strict routine: check the solar collectors, maintain the water recyclers, and scan the horizon for sandstorms. At night, when the temperature plummeted and the twin moons cast long shadows across the dunes, he'd sit by the flickering glow of his salvaged heater and drink bitter root tea. He'd made peace with solitude. Or so he thought. The pulse band on his wrist crackled to life without warning. Anthony froze, the ceramic mug halfway to his lips. No one had contacted him in 2 years, not since the last supply drop had failed to arrive. The signal was weak and fragmented, but unmistakable. A distress call. Please. Help. Dying. The voice was unfamiliar, soft, melodic, with an odd harmonic quality that suggested it wasn't human. Anthony stared at the device, his first instinct to ignore it. Out here, distress signals were often traps. Scavengers would fake emergencies to lure the unwary into ambushes. Or worse, corporate bounty hunters setting up bait for fugitives like him. But something in that voice, the raw vulnerability beneath the strange harmonics, cut through his resolve. He cursed under his breath and reached for his gear. The sandstorm hit just as he reached the coordinates. Visibility dropped to near zero as the wind whipped stinging particles against his goggles. Anthony activated the night vision on his visor, scanning the landscape. There, barely visible through the swirling dust, a metallic glint half buried in the dune. It was a small escape pod, its hull scorched and cracked. The emergency beacon pulsed erratically, casting an eerie red glow against the sand. Anthony pried open the hatch, coughing as hot air and smoke billowed out. Inside, curled in the fetal position, was a being unlike any he'd ever seen. She was slender, barely 5 feet tall, with skin that seemed to shift colors like desert glass catching the light. Delicate crystalline structures protruded from her temples and shoulders, refracting the dim interior light into tiny rainbows. Her breathing was shallow, each inhale a painful rasp. One arm was bent at an unnatural angle, and dark, viscous fluid, blood, presumably, had dried along her neck. Anthony checked her pulse. Faint, but present. He cursed again, this time in surprise. He'd expected a trap, not a genuine rescue. Carefully, he lifted the alien onto his shoulders, ignoring the protest of his own aging muscles. The walk back to his shelter felt endless, the sandstorm pushing against him with every step. By the time he reached his outpost, the alien was barely conscious. Anthony laid her on the cot he'd abandoned months ago and grabbed his medical kit. He injected a hydration gel into her neck, Scorching's version of the heat serum used on frozen worlds, and wrapped her in thermal blankets. The alien's eyes fluttered open for a moment, revealing irises that shimmered like opals. "Safe," she whispered in that strange harmonic voice. Anthony nodded. For now. The alien slept for 2 days straight. Anthony monitored her vitals through the night, adjusting the temperature controls and administering more hydration gel when necessary. When she finally woke, Anthony was repairing a water filter at the far end of the shelter. Her eyes opened slowly, scanning the room with cautious curiosity. When she tried to sit up, she winced and fell back against the pillow. Easy, Anthony said, setting down his tools. You're in my shelter. You crashed in the desert. The alien's gaze settled on him, her crystalline structures catching the light from the overhead lamp. You saved me. Anthony shrugged. Someone had to. Why? Good question. He hesitated. I used to be an engineer. Saving people was part of the job. The alien tried to move again, more carefully this time. My name is Lirin. Anthony. He offered a canteen of water. Drink slowly. Lirin took the canteen with her good hand, her fingers long and delicate, almost translucent. She drank carefully, then handed it back. Thank you. Anthony studied her. You're not from around here. No. Lirin's voice dropped. I am of the Prismari. I live in the crystal forests of Lumina 7. Never heard of it. It is far from here. She looked away. I should not have come. Why did you? Lirin's crystalline structures dimmed slightly. They were hunting me. Who? Before she could answer, Anthony's pulse band beeped. A proximity alert. Someone was approaching. He moved to the window, peering through the reinforced glass. In the distance, a dust cloud rose against the horizon. Too structured for a natural sandstorm. Too deliberate. Stay here, Anthony ordered, grabbing his solar lance, a handheld energy weapon powered by the desert sun. Lirin tried to rise. No, you don't understand. Stay down. Anthony activated the shelter's security protocols, sealing the outer doors and lowering the blast shutters. The vehicle came into view as it approached, a sleek, black hovercraft bearing the insignia of OmniCore mining. Anthony's stomach dropped. OmniCore was one of the largest corporations in the sector, known for their ruthless extraction practices and private security forces. They didn't operate on Scorch-9, which was considered worthless for mining. The hovercraft stopped 50 yards from the shelter. A ramp lowered, and 3 figures emerged, clad in black tactical armor. Their leader, a tall human with a cybernetic eye, stepped forward and activated a loudspeaker. Anthony Sterling, the voice boomed, distorted by the amplifier. We know you're in there. We've come for the alien. Hand her over, and you won't be harmed. Anthony's grip tightened on his weapon. How did they know his name? How did they find him? Lirin appeared beside him, despite her injuries. They're OmniCore mercenaries. They work for the Consortium. The Consortium? Lirin's voice was barely a whisper. They control the Prismari. They've been experimenting on us, using our light-refraction abilities to power their weapons and stealth technology. I escaped, but they've been hunting me across the sector. Anthony glanced at them. Why? Because I'm different, Lirin admitted. My refraction abilities are stronger than most Prismari. They wanted to enhance me, make me a weapon. The mercenary outside spoke again. Last chance, Sterling. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Anthony looked at Lirin, then back at the approaching figures. You said your abilities are stronger? Lirin nodded. But I've never used them offensively. We Prismari don't believe in violence. Looks like you don't have a choice. Anthony handed her a small device. This is a pulse jammer. It'll disrupt their short-range sensors for a few minutes. When I say go, you run for the maintenance tunnels. They lead to the old mining complex. Plenty of places to hide. And you? I'll keep them busy. He checked the charge on his solar lance. Go. The outer door exploded inward with a thunderous blast. Anthony fired first, the concentrated solar beam striking the lead mercenary in the chest. The man went down screaming as his armor superheated. The other 2 returned fire, their plasma rounds tearing through the shelter's interior. Anthony dove behind cover as Lirin slipped through the back corridor. He could hear their footsteps fading down the tunnel. Good. Now he just had to survive long enough for them to get clear. Anthony emerged from the shelter hours later, the desert night cool against his sweat-streaked face. The 3 mercenaries lay unconscious, or possibly dead, scattered around the entrance. He hadn't killed them, but he'd made sure they wouldn't be following anyone anytime soon. The maintenance tunnels were a maze of collapsed passages and abandoned equipment. Anthony moved carefully, his pulse band set to track Lirin's biosignature. He found her huddled in an old mining cart, shivering despite the desert heat. "You came back," Lirin said, surprise in her voice. Anthony knelt beside her. "Told you I would." "Why? You barely know me." He thought about the 17 workers who had died because of his mistake. "Because someone should have come back for me." Lirin's crystalline structures glowed softly. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." Anthony checked her injuries. "We need to keep moving. OmniCore won't stop with 3 mercenaries." They traveled through the night, following the tunnels deeper into the planet's crust. The air grew cooler, the walls glistening with moisture that condensed from the heat above. Eventually, they emerged in a vast underground cavern, a natural formation untouched by mining equipment. Lirin stopped in the center of the cavern, her breath catching. "It's beautiful." Anthony looked around. The cavern walls were lined with natural crystal formations that refracted the light from his helmet lamp into 1,000 colors. It was like standing inside a living kaleidoscope. "This is why they want me," Lirin said softly. She raised her hands and the crystals around her began to glow in response. "My connection to light, it's not just physical, it's part of who I am." Anthony watched as Lirin moved through the cavern, her very presence causing the crystals to resonate with soft, harmonic tones. For the first time since the accident, he felt something other than guilt and regret. Awe. Wonder. "They took children," Lirin continued, her voice breaking. "Orphans from the outer colonies. They told us we were special, that we were being chosen for greatness. But it was all lies. They wanted weapons, soldiers." Anthony sat on a rock, listening. "Why didn't you fight back?" "We don't believe in violence." Lirin turned to him. "But I'm starting to wonder if that's weakness." Before Anthony could respond, his pulse band beeped, a high-priority alert. OmniCore had found them. The attack came at dawn. Anthony had set up perimeter alarms around the cavern entrance, but the mercenaries had come through an alternate tunnel, one Anthony hadn't known existed. He barely had time to push Lirin behind cover before plasma fire filled the air. "Stay down," he shouted, returning fire with his solar lance. There were 6 of them this time, better equipped, better prepared. Anthony took down 2 before his weapon overheated. He ducked behind a crystal formation as plasma rounds shattered the delicate structures around him. Lirin crouched beside him, breathing hard. "They're using frequency dampeners. My abilities, they're weaker here. Can you still do something?" Lirin nodded, though she looked uncertain. "I can try." Anthony tossed her a pulse jammer. "Create a distraction. I'll handle the rest." Lirin stepped from cover, raising her hands. The remaining mercenaries turned their weapons toward them. "Last chance, alien," the leader said. "Come quietly." Lirin closed her eyes and focused. The crystals in the cavern began to vibrate, emitting a low harmonic hum. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, Lirin refracted the light in the cavern, creating multiple illusions of themselves. The mercenaries fired wildly, unable to determine which image was real. Anthony used the confusion to take down 2 more with precise shots. Only 2 remained. One charged Anthony directly, tackling him to the ground. They struggled, rolling across the crystal-strewn floor. Anthony managed to get on top, driving his fist into the mercenary's face. But the man was stronger, flipping Anthony onto his back and raising a combat knife. Before the blade could descend, a beam of concentrated light struck the mercenary in the chest. He screamed as his armor melted against his skin. Anthony looked up to see Lirin standing over them, her hands glowing with refracted energy. "I'm sorry," Lirin whispered to the dying man. Anthony helped her up. "You saved my life." Lirin's crystalline structures dimmed. "I never wanted to hurt anyone. Sometimes it's the only way to protect what matters." They gathered what supplies they could carry and left the cavern behind. Anthony knew OmniCore wouldn't stop. They had to get off planet. The old mining outpost had a functional shuttle bay, barely. Anthony had avoided it for years, knowing it would only attract attention if he tried to use it. But now, with OmniCore closing in, it was their only option. The shuttle itself was ancient, a relic from Scorch-9's brief mining boom. Anthony worked frantically to get the systems online while Lirin stood watch. "Can you fly this thing?" Lirin asked. Anthony didn't look up from the control panel. "I can try." The shuttle's engines sputtered to life as Anthony entered the launch sequence. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, more mercenaries were coming. "Ready?" Anthony asked. Lirin nodded, though she looked pale. "As I'll ever be." The shuttle lifted from the pad just as the first hovercraft appeared on the horizon. Anthony pushed the engines to their limit, banking sharply to avoid incoming fire. The shuttle groaned in protest but held together. As they broke through the atmosphere, Anthony set a course for the nearest inhabited system. "We'll find a place where they can't reach you." Lirin looked out the viewport at the receding planet. "They'll keep coming. The Consortium has influence everywhere." "Not everywhere." Anthony adjusted the course. "There's a colony on the edge of known space, Veridian Reach, neutral territory. If we can get there—" He didn't finish the thought. They both knew the odds. For 3 days, they traveled in silence, conserving power and supplies. Lirin's injuries had worsened during the fight, and Anthony worried she wouldn't make it. He spent hours patching her wounds with the limited medical supplies he'd brought. On the 4th day, Lirin spoke as they watched the stars streak past the viewport. "Why did you really save me?" Anthony considered lying but decided against it. "Because I failed to save people once. I couldn't let it happen again. You don't owe me anything." "I know." He looked at her. "But I'm starting to think maybe I was meant to find you." Lirin's crystalline structures glowed softly. "Maybe we found each other." The proximity alarm sounded before Anthony could respond. He checked the scanners, 2 vessels approaching fast. "OmniCore. Damn it," he muttered. "They must have tracked our launch." Lirin moved to the co-pilot's seat. "What's the plan?" Anthony set the shuttle on an evasive course. "We outrun them, or we fight. Can we do either?" "Not really." He glanced at her. "But we'll try." The OmniCore vessels closed in, matching their every maneuver. Anthony activated the shuttle's limited defensive systems, but they were no match for the corporate warships. "Prepare for boarding," Lirin said quietly. Anthony shook his head. "Not happening." He initiated a dangerous maneuver, a slingshot around a nearby gas giant that would either give them enough speed to escape or tear the shuttle apart. The G-forces pressed them into their seats as the shuttle banked sharply. For a moment, it seemed to work. The OmniCore vessels fell behind, unable to match the shuttle's trajectory. But as they cleared the gas giant's gravity well, Anthony saw the truth. A fleet awaited them. Dozens of OmniCore ships formed a blockade, their weapons trained on the tiny shuttle. There was no escape. Lirin placed a hand on Anthony's arm. "Let me try something." Before he could stop her, Lirin stood and walked to the shuttle's observation deck. Anthony followed, watching in disbelief as Lirin pressed her hands against the viewport. The crystalline structures along her body began to glow intensely, brighter than Anthony had ever seen. The light refracted through the shuttle's interior, filling the cabin with a rainbow of colors. "What are you doing?" Anthony asked. "Something I've never tried before." Lirin's voice was strained. "My people believe light is life. Maybe it can be both." The OmniCore vessels opened fire. Anthony braced for impact, but it never came. Instead, the light from Lirin's body expanded outward, forming a protective bubble around the shuttle. The plasma rounds struck the barrier and dissipated harmlessly. The fleet fired again and again, but the light held. Lirin's breathing grew labored. "I can't maintain this forever." Anthony moved to help her, but Lirin shook her head. "No. If you touch me, the connection breaks." Then what? Lirin smiled weakly. Then I show them what the Prismari are really capable of. With a final surge of energy, Lirin expanded the light barrier outward, engulfing the entire OmniCore fleet. The ship's systems overloaded as the refracted light penetrated their hulls, disabling weapons and navigation. Anthony watched in awe as Lirin's body began to dissolve into pure light, becoming one with the energy they had summoned. Lirin, stop! You're killing yourself! It's okay, Lirin whispered, her voice barely audible. This is what I was meant for, not as a weapon, but as a shield. The light reached its peak intensity, then suddenly collapsed inward. The OmniCore fleet drifted, powerless. The shuttle hung in space, undamaged. And Lirin was gone. Anthony arrived at Veridian Reach, alone. The colony officials questioned him about the disabled OmniCore fleet, but Anthony had no answers they would believe. He settled on the edge of the colony, in a small dwelling overlooking the ocean. He kept Lirin's memory alive in small ways. A crystal formation in his window that caught the sunlight just so. A melody he'd heard in the cavern hummed when he was alone. Most importantly, he began using his engineering skills again. Not for corporations, but for the community. He fixed water purifiers for the colonists, repaired solar collectors, helped build shelters for refugees. It wasn't redemption, not exactly, but it was a start. Years passed. As Anthony grew older, his hair turned silver, and his hands bore the scars of hard work. The colony thrived, becoming a haven for those escaping corporate control. One day, as Anthony worked on a new irrigation system, a young girl approached him. She couldn't have been more than 10, with skin that shimmered like desert glass and delicate crystalline structures along her temples. "Hello," she said, her voice carrying that familiar harmonic quality. Anthony froze, his tools slipping from his hands. "You're a Prismari," she confirmed. "My name is Syl." Anthony knelt to her level. "How did you find me?" Syl smiled, and for a moment, Anthony saw Lirin in her features. Light travels far, Engineer Anthony, even across the stars. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small crystal. It glowed with a soft blue light. "This is for you, from Lirin." Anthony took the crystal, feeling its warmth in his palm. Inside, he could see a faint image, a figure standing in a field of light. "Thank you," he whispered. Syl touched his hand. "Lirin told us about you, how you showed her that kindness is rare, but when it finds you, you hold on." Anthony's vision blurred. "I wish I could have done more." "You did enough." Syl stood. "Now it's our turn to protect those who need it." As she walked away, Anthony noticed something else, a small symbol carved into the wall of his workshop. A flame inside a hand, glowing with soft blue light. He smiled through his tears. Somewhere, in the space between stars, Lirin was still with him. And that was enough.